Okay, you planted your food plot. You followed all the steps, you did everything right, you got a great stand of whatever it may be, but it's getting on towards the end of the growing season, you're seeing some weeds. What do I do to it? That's the next question that is very common, is how do I maintain my food plots? And because there are different types of food plots, you certainly would manage them differently. The food plots that get the most questions are perennial food plots. Perennial clovers, chicory, alfalfa, etc. And you commonly read that you need to mow them regularly in order to keep them nutritious, attractive, highly digestible, and to control weeds. Certainly mowing can be used in helping maintain perennial food plots, but regular mowing, as you might often have read or heard, is not required, especially if you're attending to weeds with the proper herbicides at the proper time. If you don't feel comfortable using herbicides in your perennial food plots, certainly regular mowing would be your best strategy with regard to maintaining the forages that you have. However, if you're comfortable and have a little knowledge in the use of selective herbicides and when they should be used, they can keep your food plots relatively weed-free such that repetitive mowing isn't necessary. We commonly spray our perennial plots in spring to control incoming warm season weeds, and again in fall to control incoming cool season weeds. And there are many different herbicides out there that you can use to maintain your food plots, but think about what types of weeds you have. Of course, there are grass selective herbicides to control grass weeds. There are broadleaf selective herbicides to control broadleaf or forb weeds. And then there also are broad spectrum selective herbicides that control some broadleaf as well as some grass weeds. That's not to say it's bad if you have any weeds in your food plots. Indeed, the presence of some weeds actually might be good. Many of these plants are eaten as readily as the food plot plants, and some of them, although they might not be eaten, can provide a little structure in the food plot that helps the food plot receive more use by such things as deer fawns, turkey poults, adult turkeys. So having clean, green, and even down at about 12 to 8 inches high is not exactly best case scenario. As long as you have a good standing crop of forage out there, it is available. Even though there is presence of some weeds, that's not a bad thing, and in many cases it's actually desirable. Well, we've done a lot of experiments with perennial food plots. Over time, what we found is very interesting, especially if we spray spring and or fall. We don't need to mow our perennial food plots but once a year, and that's in late summer when the perennial forages are typically going into a slump or might even be senescent because of the dry, hot summer conditions. And so by mowing food plots regularly through the summertime, you actually can produce space that allows more weeds to grow. What we found through replication is that in our mowed food plots, we actually had more weed pressure than in our unmowed food plots. Moreover, we have put cameras in these plots to look at visitation and use by deer. In the unmowed plots, on average, we get twice the visitation by deer. So if you take one large plot, for example, you mow sections and you don't mow sections, the amount of use that we have recorded in the unmowed sections is double that of the mowed sections. Also, we collect the amount of forage produced over time by collecting this at the end of each session before mowing, and we look at the amount of forage that is inside the cage versus outside the cage. The deer consumed twice as much forage in the unmowed sections of the plots than in the mowed sections of the plots. And so, this is all to say there is no need to regularly mow your perennial food plots. In fact, you may be shooting yourself in the foot because you're creating additional space for those weeds to develop and grow. However, if you're not able to use those selective herbicides, certainly there may be a need then to do a little more frequent mowing in order to keep the plots from being completely choked out by some weed species. But think of where your weed threshold is. The presence of one or two plants that you'd rather not have does not necessarily mean you need to mow the whole plot. And with regard to herbicide applications, it doesn't have to be with a tractor and a pull-behind or three-point hitch sprayer or an ATV with an ATV sprayer. It might be as simple as a backpack sprayer and you doing some spot applications, especially when problem plants are not occurring all over the field. With regard to annual plots, there's really no need to mow at all. If you have done a good job of establishing the plot, you should have good forage production, not terrible weed competition, especially for annual cool season plots on through the growing cycle until the annual cool season forages that you planted have flowered and matured. And at that time, the plot is done. Managing your warm season annual plots can be a bit complicated, especially if you're tackling glyphosate resistant weeds. There are a number of herbicides that can be used pre-emergence with all of your warm season annual food plots. And then of course there are also post-emergence herbicides that can be used that are applied to the leaves of the weeds once they are growing and in competition with your warm season plot. Managing your food plots can be a bit complicated. There's lots of different herbicides that are available. Most people don't have a very good working knowledge of herbicides, but with just a little bit of reading and consideration, you can easily figure out what's best for you and your situation, and then considering how much mowing might be necessary in your perennial plots and the timing at which that might be best done can help you be much more successful and your food plots much more productive to feed more deer.